organization that helps disaster and war victims, as well as provides emergency medical assistance. In World War I, the Red Cross sent doctors and nurses to supply medical attention to the suffering Allied soldiers. During World War I, the Red Cross provided their assistance both in the U.S. itself and for the troops fighting overseas, focusing on health and medical services. They opened 58 domestic and overseas hospitals for the military, staffing them with doctors and nurses, and provided ambulances and trucks. They responded immediately after war was declared, and they were in France by June 1917. And by 1918, they had over 8,000 personnel overseas, assisting the soldiers. This was the first war in which the nurses were recognized for their work, and the importance of training was emphasized. Approximately 20,000 nurses were assigned to military service, many of them remaining abroad after the war to assist with post-war relief programs. At first, the trained nurses were only used overseas in France, but as the war went on, the demand grew and the supply shrank, and it became necessary to train more nurses. In response to this demand, the American Red Cross Nursing Service, directed by Jane Delano, began recruiting nurses to serve overseas. Another group was opened to meet this demand, the National Emergency Committee on Nursing, which eventually became the Committee on Nursing of the General Medical Board of the Council of National Defense. And in colleges all across America, nurses were having emergency 3-month training. Although the nurses did not serve at the front line, they served 3 other types of hospitals organized for treating the wounded: field hospitals just behind the front, evacuation hospitals 10 miles back from the front, and base hospitals located safely away from the front.
The medical personnel were faced with various dangers, including but not limited to diseases and gas poisoning. Although no nurse died from the enemy fire, many died in the line of duty. Disease threatened the military training grounds more than the wounds and injuries. The camps were dangerous because it contained 30 to 40,000 people, some of which lived in rural areas, and they were not exposed to the diseases that the city dwellers were immune to. The diseases killed 63,000 soldiers and sailors, which the medical personnel were in danger of contracting as they attempted to treat them. These diseases included influenza, measles, and syphilis. Measles and mumps were some of the most troublesome, as they lowered the immune system and made them susceptible to other illnesses. All these threats were facing the nurses and doctors every day when treating their patients. World War I showed a great improvement to the way battle wounds were treated, due to advances in surgical methods, the use of x-rays, tetanus antitoxin, and blood transfusions, as well as the new vehicles such as ambulances. But even with all the advances, the death toll was still high. Many soldiers merely died of shock. Shock was not completely understood at the time, and it was treated with first aid. The wounded was given hot, sweet, heated drink, wrapped up and kept warm by stoves under his stretcher while waiting. The ambulance rides often aggravated the shock due to the anxiety of the pain. This sometimes resulted in death when broken bones were allowed to scrape together. Another problem was blood transfusions. The concept of blood types made the process less dangerous, but there were still some incompatibility issues, as the concept was known but not perfected. The transfusions were often by the syringe method, and when the patient died, it was from a case of irreversible shock, and not due to the poorly performed transfusion. There was yet another issue to the blood clotting in the syringe before it got to the recipient. This was solved by adding citrate to the blood in order to thin it, which saved thousands of lives. These techniques were new and groundbreaking for the war, and it did save thousands of lives.
So, was America in total war? Based on the involvement of the Red Cross, the answer is yes. When war was declared on Germany, recruiting and training stations popped up all over the country, along with propaganda to promote volunteering. There were colleges that would give their campuses to training, and thousands of medical supplies and people were shipped overseas to help the wounded. The majority of the treatments discovered before the war, while helpful, really came to shine in the war setting. And food was not the only thing rationed. Medical supplies and parts for vehicles were being saved in order to treat soldiers and make ambulances. In conclusion, the United States was in a total war, and Red Cross was doing everything it could to help. In the words of General Pershing, no organization since the world began has done such great constructive work with the efficiency, dispatch, sympathy, and understanding with which the Red Cross has accomplished its work.